Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for sitting down with me this afternoon to talk about the session. And
thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the great work that you and Rick do.
Thanks very much.
All the folks at AIM. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for being a partner as we try to grow business here in Massachusetts.
So as you think about the formal sessions that ended at the end of July, or as I like to think of it, early August.
Yeah.
When you think back on the session, what was your most significant accomplishment?
I was very pleased. We tackled anything from addressing major energy legislation to civil rights legislation relative to the transgender bill. So I think that we tackled some very difficult issues that had not been addressed in a while. The pay equity legislation. So I was extremely pleased in terms of the major pieces of legislation. But what I was most pleased about, again, which I try to put an emphasis on, is that relative to fiscal responsibility. John, we were faced with a situation where we had a budget that was in the conference at the time. And we were told that we were some $200 to $250 million that we had to make cuts or make additional revenue, whatever. We decided, obviously, to further cut the budget. Not a very easy situation, as you're right in the middle of trying to get the whole thing completed. And I'm proud to say that we were able to make those decisions. And again, making sure that the most vulnerable were addressed, making sure that we did not hurt or make further cuts into our local aid or education funding, make sure that they were held harmless. So those are some of the things I think I was most proud of.
I was about to ask, what was the biggest challenge? It sounds like that budgetary situation was and maybe remains a challenge into this fiscal year? Yes,
it still remains a fiscal challenge. And you know what's interesting, John, about this whole process, and maybe you and I and Rick may want to even have a conversation about this at some point also. When you read in terms of where Massachusetts is in comparison to the nation, in comparison to other states individually, and I hear this from, I just got back, I don't know, about 3 weeks ago, we had our speakers conference. People look at Massachusetts and say, wow, you folks are doing right things. We've got to cut another $1 billion from our budget. We have to do this, we have to do that. And they're struggling in terms of how to do it. What I like about Massachusetts is we make the decision and we do it.
Right.
We don't procrastinate and let matters get any worse. But with all of the criteria out there that's showing that Massachusetts should be doing better,
right,
we're still, in somewhat of a difficult situation. Our unemployment rates are good, yet that tax revenue does not seem to be coming in at the rate one would expect. But again, having said that, what I'm most proud of the fact that we've been able to tackle those issues. Here in the House, we made a priority not to increase any taxes, not to change any fees, increase any fees. So again, I'm hopeful that we're going to continue on the road to fiscal responsibility.
You're right, and I think the House has taken an appropriate measure of pride in making sure that the stuff that you tackle is business friendly and conducive to continued economic growth in the Commonwealth. And hopefully that fiscal catch-up will occur at some point. But a lot of people have remarked that the economy seems to be doing well, but there's something missing in that fiscal picture that nobody can quite figure out. So hopefully if you keep up the good work, it'll all catch up at some point.
It's interesting because I'm trying to meet with various people to get the answer. Representative Ferranti attends the Kennedy School. One of her professors
You sure you should allow that?
Pearlstein. One of her professors was a former Secretary of the Treasury, I think, under Reagan. He's one of the most respected people there. Then I said to her, I want to talk to that guy. I want to see if he has the answers. You know, at one of our last meetings, you know, he talked to the people, Eric Rosengren and whatnot, and no one seems to have that answer as to you know, why we're trying to speculate. But let me just say this, and there are those out there I know who have been somewhat not as understanding in terms of my relationship with the business community. I look at my relationship with the business community, hopefully as a good one, a fruitful one, one that you're not always going to agree with me. And you've made that clear at times, and that's okay. But when we're talking about legislation, I think everyone should have a place at the table. And that includes unions, business, the advocates for the poor and the disabled. But for instance, if you take a look, you know, at what we did relative to pay equity, what we did relative to transgender, okay? It's all well and good to say, you know, that headline that, oh, we passed transgender or we passed pay equity, and that's, you know, that's wonderful. But if you take a look and you read into the legislation itself, I'm not looking for the headline, I'm looking for laws that work. Okay, I think that's the most important thing that we can do. And quite frankly, I don't think either one of those bills would have gotten done without the support and input that AIM had given us. And because of the fact that everyone says, well, pay equity, well, that's pretty easy. You know, everyone thinks everyone, and who can argue against that? Transgender, they shouldn't be discriminated against. But what I found is that business wasn't the enemy in trying to get those passed. They were a partner. Business wanted to make sure that with pay equity, there weren't some unintended consequences. Business wanted to make sure that relative to transgender, that what does it mean for businesses? What protections do we have to have in? And that's what the whole thing was. For instance, to put those protections in both of those legislation, so the business would know that, hey, you know, I'm for this, but I want to make sure that down the road, I have to know what the rules and regs are. And that was the importance of it with both. So that's why no matter, you know, whether it's an advocate, whether it's business, my style is to get everyone into the room and say, okay, what can we do? How can we come to a good place that everyone's maybe not totally happy, but a lot happier than they were when the bill started through the process?
Well, I can certainly attest to the pay equity effort. Representative Haddad was quite patient with us in terms of the number of back and forth discussions, bringing the Attorney General's office into it, and I think at the end of the day, not just AIM, but other business groups were able to support. And you got a nearly unanimous vote out of the House, which I think people kind of underrate how significant that is, because I know how hard it can be.
I think you understand that.
That many votes. But that's a measure, I think, of the fact that you've done the outreach, you've done the inclusion, you've done the, you've made the effort to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, and so when the vote occurs, there's nothing left to complain about. You know, which is, I think that's a measure of
again,
leadership style.
That's what it is. It's my particular leadership style. If you were to come to me with a piece of legislation and, you know, I thought it may affect, you know, a particular group, I would call that group and said, well, this is what AIM is proposing. Well, what do you think about it? You know, you mentioned Pat, and I also have to give a lot of credit also to Chairman Dempsey. I think he does a superb job. I happen to know, because he always tells me whenever we're going through legislation, this is the opinion of this group, this group, this group, and he's always mentioning you. So again, just another example of the relationship that I think we've been able to build here.
Absolutely. So let's talk for a second about the energy bill. Clearly, that's an area of policy where there are a lot of different competing interests, and I think for us, it's always kind of first an issue of cost. And the impact of those costs on some of our members, and trying to balance that against the legitimate interests of folks in the environmental community. Talk a little bit about what a challenge that is.
That was one of
for
the
the
biggest.
institution.
That was one of the biggest challenges. We knew we had to do something. Where we're at, in terms of where we are relative to clean energy, sustainability, and the like. But I think again that the legislation was a good piece. I think that again it was one of those pieces that more Chairman Golden, I think, and Chairman Dempsey spent a lot more time. Chris Eicher from my office,
Right.
all of those folks were superb. But again, one of the issues that I hear consistently when you talk about doing business in Massachusetts is the cost of energy. In terms of one of the issues that businesses have.
Right.
Whether I haven't been able to control just yet, I'm working on that. But I think that there are certain things making the market much more competitive than it's ever been,
Right.
bringing in a various different sources, a diversification
Right.
of sources. And what I also really like that's sort of been lost is the possibility of a new business being brought here into Massachusetts
Right.
in terms of offshore wind. I know they had a big ribbon cutting, I guess, or an event down in New Bedford a couple of
the
weeks
terminal,
ago.
right.
And I look at us as probably be one of the major first in the nation, again, in terms of creating a new energy. So I'm proud of the bill we did. Again, I think hopefully it shows the balance
Right.
that I continue to talk about. And I think at the end of the day, we're very pleased what we have.
As you know, at the end, we did support the bill and communicated that to everybody. And as I've told my board and our members, now it's on to the Baker administration. We'll make sure that they do the right thing, because you've given them all the tools to do a good solicitation, to do a good evaluation of what comes in for bids, and then hopefully pick something that makes not just environmental sense, but economic sense as well.
Right, that's what I'm
And
talking
we're going to hold
about.
their feet to the fire.
Yeah, and I think that the governor will do that.
I think so.
Because that's one of the things that I had mentioned. When I talk to folks about coming to Massachusetts or staying in Massachusetts, although there are, I look at one of my major roles is to try to create jobs, keep jobs here. That's been from the first day that I got here, I could say one of my priorities. One of the first major items I always hear, big business, small business, residential folks, is the cost of energy.
So with the 5 minutes remaining as we look out into the 2017-18 session, what are the types and kinds of things that the business community might do to be a little bit more effective here in the State House than we already are?
I think your input relative to finances, fiscal, looks like it's going to be a real challenge again as we're moving through this year is important. The other interesting thing about business, which I probably should have mentioned earlier, I'm a big proponent of early education, as you probably have seen or heard. And when everyone would think about business, I think everyone's view would be sort of higher education and on up. That's really what their concern would be. How do we provide the best and the brightest and to get them out there into the workforce to help our business? I've been so excited to see businesses' involvement in early education. They really get it in terms of, they don't look at it just as a place, obviously, where people obviously youngsters get educated and get ready to start their educational
Get that good
years.
foundation in place.
But they really look at it. I was shocked to see sort of what I heard from businesses to say, we understand that with that foundation, that we can move on, and it's good for us as well. The opioid epidemic is going to continue you know, to be a major issue facing us. But I think also, as we're progressing through this, you know, I'm looking for any and all ideas in terms of what we can do, again, to increase business. And by increasing business, I'm talking about creating jobs and more jobs. So you and I are going to be talking a lot, I'm sure, in the weeks, months, and year ahead.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. You're very generous to spend it with us.
And thank you so much. Thank you for all the input that you've always had.
Thank you.